Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Brian Goldie.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that introduction. The last book I read was Tolstoy's, the Russian, what was he called? Anyway, I am known for telling stories. I am known for slavering and blethering. My immortal memories, while they may be a wee bit lengthy, are purely and simply designed to throw a light on burdens to people who are not what you would call normally burdens people. I hope you enjoy this one, because this one is written for burdens people. A simple bard, unbroken by rules of art, he pours the wild effusions of his heart, and if inspired, 'tis nature's powers inspire. Hers all the melting thrill, and hers the kindling fire. We are all aware of the many biographies and titles which have been written over the past 200 years or so relating to the subject of Robert Burns. The spontaneity of his writing and the lack of regard for regulation is what attracts many of his followers from within and without the Burns fraternity to read and enjoy his works. He has been conferred with a number of titles: Ploughman Poet, Heaven-taught Ploughman, Poet of the Heart, and more. The distinction of being a loving husband and father, however, seems to be an acknowledgement which is currently missing from his CV, and I would like to correct that omission at this stage of my toast. His most illustrious accolades are, of course, the awards of the Scottish Masonic community, as he was declared Caledonia's Bard by Grand Lodge and Poet Laureate by the Masons of the Canongate in Edinburgh. These awards reflect the quality of his writings and recognise the importance of, firstly, the Kilmarnock edition and the subsequent release of the Edinburgh editions, which many would argue contained more of Burns than the original publication. Although it was argued that Burns had never formally accepted the title of laureate, in these lines to his friend Gavin Hamilton, he clearly acknowledged the award. To phrase you and praise you, ye ken your laureate's kerns. The prayer still, your share still, of grateful minstrel Burns. The titles, however, are not awarded in isolation, but are also a result of his attention to the plight of humanity, the environment, and of course the natural world, and his foresight as far as matters that genuinely affect ordinary people in terms of their well-being and ability to exist in a meaningful and sustainable way is no less than phenomenal. And the titles of A Man for All Seasons and On Current Evidence, A Man for All Time, do not seem to be unreasonable. Isn't it strange, however, that today, in the 21st century, we have groups and individuals who credit themselves with a successful approach to environmental matters concerning climate change and the march to the dreaded net zero? I'm sorry to advise them that what they are saying now has all been said before, and environmentalism and climate change, in particular relating to farming, is hardly a new concept. Furthermore, poverty today is as meaningful as it was in Burns's time, albeit at least with a more limited effect, courtesy of what purports to be a more sympathetic government and the benefit system. Wouldn't it seem, however, that more appropriate when looking for solutions to any one of a number of governmental issues to pick up a copy of a Burns book and take the common sense and wisdom that's written on every page. The modern Burns movement has been built on the premise of Burns's immortality. But as we all know, the status of immortality is afforded to every one of us, in the sense that when we depart this mortal coil, sometime, somewhere, a family member or a close friend will remember an incident, a holiday, or a happy moment, and thus every person here will become immortal. Robert Burns, of course, falls into a completely different category, in that through his belief in his fellow man, his ethos of equality and friendship, while continuing to be an icon, he has become the foundation of an ideology. And it is this status which ensures that he will never be forgotten. His persona will continue to graduate from strength to strength. And as an ideologue, he cannot or will not be deleted from memory. I've been asked on many occasions if my affinity to the promotion and perpetuation of Burns's works has likened the adherence of his values to some kind of cult behaviour. This is, of course, nonsense, given that the concerns and scenarios he committed to paper related to the difficulties and life experiences of ordinary people, people like you and me, albeit our experiences of life is a whole lot easier than that of our predecessors in 18th century Scotland. This only serves to ensure that people like us must continue to extol his virtues, and accordingly must also be unafraid to try to understand his feelings. Because if we do not comprehend the whole character, how can we even attempt to answer the relevant questions? And of course, answer his detractors. While I suppose I am admitting that in today's climate, more than 200 years after the event, that excuses are made in certain circumstances relating to aspects of his behavioural patterns, the so-called education elitists and their acolytes who are happy to criticise should exercise the benefit of the learning they allegedly profess, instead of the type of academic snobbery which they cannot hide, by examining on a like-for-like basis the life and living scenarios in a by comparison 2 centuries apart. They would then probably be forced to admit that the excuses we have been accused of offering in the past have suddenly become reasons. We will not, however, find ourselves in a situation where the poet shall be regarded as anything less than an icon, and history will provide the answer that while information and learning can often confuse the student, sooner or later the solution becomes clear. Many hundreds of years ago, a Latin writer was heard to say, "The poet is born." And so it was. The French author, Voltaire, exclaimed, "Why do we always look to the Scots for inspiration? Why indeed? Look no further. You have discovered Robert Burns." If other poets or writers have climbed the heights more successfully, none have outshone Burns in the charms, the mercurial and fascinating level of conversation, the spontaneous eloquence of social argument, or the unstudied poignancy of repartee. Such was the irresistible power of attraction that encircled him, although his manner was often strangely peculiar to himself. He never failed to delight and excel in the parlours and drawing rooms of the social elite. Like a sorcerer or a hypnotist, his voice alone could improve upon the magic of his eye. Sonorous, and with the finest modulations, it captivated with the melody of poesy, the anticipation of nervous reasoning, or the fervour of enthusiastic patriotism. Where he paid compliment, it might indeed have had the same power of intoxication, and from him, approval was an honest tribute from the warmth and sincerity of his heart. The celebration in which we are privileged to share tonight and the values I extol are the most remarkable phenomena the world has ever witnessed. Literary history has no parallel in exaltation and praise for an individual steeped in his cultural identity and supremely aware of his role in relation to fairness and humanity. There is something awe-inspiring and impressive in the acknowledgement of the worldwide social groups who, like us, are enjoying the conviviality of good company in the name and memory of Robert Burns. His ethos of freedom for all and the legacy of love for his fellow Scot is the catalyst which compounds my delight at the insistence that Scottish culture, his love of nature, and his benevolence to those less fortunate than himself ensures that his mantle of poet of the heart and apostle of freedom is surely well earned. His ability to inspire precise and complete significance in the minds and opinions of Scots as he delivers his message with forceful and arrogant pride, while at the same time being subtle in the humour and uncompromising in his satire. He was proud of his Ayrshire roots, and he wrote and spoke with a passion and empathy which other writers may have attempted to emulate but have been unable to match. His works appeared to be a mirror of his thoughts, and the enthusiasm with which he expressed a directness of purpose left those who had the pleasure of joining him mindful that they were indeed in the company of greatness. As he expressed himself with great eloquence, he converted the roughness of his mother tongue into a dialect which could be as melodious as a violin, and a vernacular which could rival the classics. He spoke with authority and could converse with anyone at any level on any subject, and before long the individual once regarded as clodhopper achieved the status of personality that he craved. And so it was, the humble farmer's son, whose destiny was written in the stars and whose birth in the village of Alloway, surely a gift from Mother Nature with the God-given talent to excite the individual and communities alike, a star whose light has burned for over 200 years and will continue to show the way for generations, as long as you and I and those who follow us commit themselves to the values of fairness and equality, and do not forget the trials of injustice, the rigours of poverty, and the insecurity of uncertainty. As Halley's comet painted the night sky with its light, coinciding with Mother Nature's gift to the world, surely we must all recognise that on that very evening, the star of Robbie Burns was born. Much has changed in the small village that was Alloway, as over the years the village has witnessed the expansion which is commonplace today. Developments now on the site where Burns would have been known to walk and play. His legacy, however, equates to more than a presence and a plaque on a wall. He's left the Scottish people something to be proud of, as they extol the prowess of the ploughman genius, and in turn, many of their progeny who have left these shores to seek a better life for their families, promote and perpetuate the legend of the literary troubadour whose short but productive life resulted in an unprecedented celebration of the Scottish language and culture, and whose songs and poems made a nation feel so much better about themselves, engendering the belief that common people could actually rise above the circumstances of their birth. As we who have called ourselves Burns students for many years ask ourselves, why? Who is this guy who says the things we identify with? The couthy sayings and the phrases which each and every one of us has heard from our parents and grandparents, and have used at some time in our lives, bearing in mind that he used and wrote them over 250 years ago. Each and every one of us has, however, a different notion of his qualities, and while his message is clear, it is not for everyone. And while we have to respect that the individual right to choose is certainly one of the main considerations in a level of commitment to the Burns ideology. I've often said that when you open a Burns book, it could be likened to opening a good bottle of whiskey. And that when you pop the cork, you never know exactly what you're going to get. But you'll never get to the bottom of the bottle without becoming intoxicated and thirsting for more. He was a reader and a scholar whose search for learning and knowledge would rival that of scribes and those who sought to live their lives in book learning, and in fact could have been successful in any walk of life. In his own words, the first two books I've ever read in private, and which gave me more pleasure than any other I've ever come to know, were The Life of Hannibal and The History of Sir William Wallace. The story of Wallace poured a Scottish prejudice in my veins, which will boil there until the floodgates of life close in eternal life. Who would have thought that Burns would indeed be the archetypal Republican, while on occasion leaning towards the Jacobite cause, but a warrior nevertheless who fought the cause of freedom with a quill rather than a sword in his hand, and at the same time as an employee of the Crown, as he fulfilled his duties as a tax inspector. And we heard previously, if he had lived beyond his 37th year, he would have taken up the post of tax supervisor in the city of Dunblane. We must remember, however, that he was brought into this world only a few short years after the debacle of the 1745 rebellion and the bloodletting and butchery that followed the Battle of Culloden. He himself would witness the contemptuous attitudes of our English neighbours. No insult intended. And the plight of his fellow Scot. But patriotic sympathies apart, his abilities to appeal with song and verse are legend. And in rhyme and song were in the manner of the deep language of my heart. I've taken a few lines from songs written in the 20th century. The first by Bob Dylan, which I honestly believe could have been inspired by Burns. How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. A song expressing the desire and wish to be free banned in the former USSR and concerned that it advocated insurrection and rebellion. Dylan also said that My Love Was Like a Red, Red Rose was the most beautiful love song he had ever heard. Has any writer penned sentiments which compare to these? Possibly not, although there may be someone, somewhere, who has written lines to a lover to deliver a similar message. The second from John Lennon. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. Startling similarities too. Then let us pray that come it may, as come it will for all that sense and worth for all the earth shall bear the grief and all that, for all that and all that, it's coming yet for all that, that man to man the world, Lord, shall brothers be for all that. Having analysed the poem on a number of occasions, I get the idea of the brotherhood of man. The theme of honesty running through all of the verses, references to the struggle of ordinary folk, and comparisons to the landlords and the aristocracy. But I think that the idea of man to man, the world o'er, shall brothers be for all that, is still, for a wee while, going to be a work in progress. However, the significance of the theme of freedom, peace, and love in the aforementioned examples, and in my opinion, Burns, could have been the likely inspiration in them all. If I had to analyse the character, I would expound the facts that his psyche was charged with emotion, awareness, and common sense. And despite the hardship of his background, he had a wondrous sense of humour. He relished the gift of life. Very often, however, his jocular facade belied a profound compassion, and his darkest moments, deep feelings of depression. It's my belief that this state of mind very often portrayed a man who continually sought the approval of his friends, and when not in their company, suffered from the fear and anxiety of being alone. Such was his strength, however, that during these intervals he was never afraid to admit that his biggest failing was mankind's universal disease, the weakness of the human spirit. Weaknesses aside, he was at least as passionate for Scottish sovereignty as Bruce and Wallace. He abhorred the political indifference, injustice and social betrayal of his fellow man. He has been compared to Byron, Keats and even William Shakespeare. But did any of the aforementioned ever pen a sentiment like the following? God knows, I am no saint. I have a whole list of follies and sins to answer for. But if I could, and I believe that I can, I would wipe all tears from all eyes. No figure in world literature ever since has ever written with such compassion and empathy. And with this has left a message for all, a message of friendship, fellowship, and a message of love, which is timeless and universal. In an amazing 37 short and difficult years, he managed to write over 350 poems and write or amend 370 songs. The subjects ranging from love, compassion, humanity, satire, and national pride. This quotation by Sir Alexander Gray could easily have been written with Burns in mind. This is my country, the land that begat me. These windy spaces are surely my own, and those who toil here in the sweat of their faces are flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. And toil he did, as the principal labourer in his father's unsuccessful enterprise, during which he spent days at the plough, often in the most foul of weather conditions, and at the end of it all, a life of poor health, bouts of fever, and the depressing realisation that there was no end result in profit or security. In his own words, he compared his lifestyle to that of a cheerless hermit with the unceasing moil of a galley slave. I should add at this time that my opinions relating to his father are less than complimentary, and that despite knowing that his son was indeed suffering a precarious state of health, he did work him like a slave, and in all probability was at least in part responsible for the continuing mental and physical torment he had suffered during his lifetime and up until his very premature death. The ethos of William Burns, or William Burness, was entrenched in the orthodoxy of puritanical Calvinism, believing that the key to righteousness and godliness was hard work, morality, which is reflected in his statement, "The Lord made no time for leisure." But while Burns is often accused of spending what spare time he had in frivolous pursuits, his leisure was spent in the search for learning and writing, although there were many instances in which he found himself a victim of suspicion and rebuke. As his physical state continued to worsen, he was advised to embark on a course of treatment, which I have no doubt hastened his demise. Following an unsuccessful regime of bathing in the Solway and taking waters of the Brow Well, he resolved that he could no longer suffer the rigours of the treatment, which left him in a state of collapse. He had barely enough energy to mount his horse and must have suffered an agonising journey to his home to be with his family. Like his father, Robin the poet died in penury and delirium on the 21st of July, 1796. On the day of his funeral, his cortege was driven through the streets of Dumblane, where 30,000 people lined the route. As the coffin was passing a section of the crowd, one doleful voice was heard to say, "Who'll be our poet now?" He was laid to rest in St Michael's Kirkyard, where in a fitting tribute, a mausoleum has been built to his memory, and is a fitting depiction of his virtues of quality and artistry. Significantly, as his first attempt at verse was for a young girl, as he wrote for Nellie Kilpatrick. "Oh, once I loved a bonny lass, aye, and I love her still, and while that virtue warms my breast, I'll love my handsome Nell." So his last piece, "O Wert Thou in the Cold Blast," was written for Jessie Lewis, who nursed him on his deathbed. As we remember Rab the Rhymer, the heaven-taught ploughman, prince of poets, scholar and literary genius, whose national pride and political opinions belied his compassionate nature, let us celebrate the legacy he has left to his countrymen, a legacy of love, peace, and the inspiration to shape our future and our destiny. Our monarch's hindmost year but in was 25 days begun. 'Twas then a blast o' Januar wind blew handsel in on Robin. fortunes great and small, but I hurt haven't them all. He'll be a credit to us all. We'll all be proud of Robin. Ladies and gentlemen, they say a picture paints 1,000 words. I have used 1,000 words to paint a picture of the character I believe is our greatest Scottish literary genius. And I'm proud to acknowledge him as Caledonian's bard and Scotland's favourite son. In closing, and in consideration of the societal demands of the 21st century, that if you aren't a millionaire, you've failed. And your attempt to keep up with the Joneses has been for nothing. I'd like you to think about the following. It's no in titles, nor in rank. It's no in wealth, like London Bank, to purchase peace and rest. It's no in Mackin, Muckle Mare. It's no in Brooks. It's no in Lair, to make us truly blessed. If happiness hath not her seat and centre in the breast, we may be wise or rich or great, but never can be blessed. Nae treasures nor pleasures can make us happy lang. The heart eyes the part eye that makes us right or wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd be grateful if you would join me in the toast. To the immortal memory of Robert Burke.